My blood pressure has just about returned to normal after a stressful Saturday afternoon at Emirates Stadium. There's been a Riccardo Calafiori injury scare. Is Mikel Merino ready to play? Dermot Gallagher's ref watch hits new lows. And there's the small matter of Arsenal versus PSG in the UEFA Champions League this Tuesday. We'll discuss all that and more on another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's go. Hey everybody, how you doing? Hope you're all good. Hope you are all well. Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host Harry Symeou, coming to you on this gloomy Monday evening here in London. But guess what? The Champions League's back tomorrow. And it really does kind of feel like the turnaround between games right now is just too quick. I know we always go on about this in the schedule, and I know that there's a lot of teams that have to contend with this and cope with this. So we're not alone in having complaints and frustrations about it. But I was speaking to a colleague and a very good friend, a French football expert, who you're going to hear from a little bit later on in the podcast about this game today. And it's amazing to me that the Premier League and the English football authorities, if you like, do so little to help their teams when it comes to European competition. Now, I'm not saying this is an Arsenal-only problem. This is a big problem that we have in English football generally, I would say. But I was looking into Paris Saint-Germain in a lot more detail this morning, of course, with the game coming very, very soon. I'm working on the game, so I've done some real deep research on Paris Saint-Germain, their season so far, etc., what we can expect and all the rest of it. But I always go back to that point whenever I look at a potential or a future Champions League opponent for Arsenal, and I see that, hey, they played on the Friday whilst we played in, later on the Saturday in our case. And I look at the fact that they've got that extra day's rest. It feels like everybody's protecting them. It feels like they're just in a much better place going into that fixture. It really, really frustrates me, because why can't we do something like that? Now, I know we had a Carabao Cup game on Wednesday, which made that difficult and all the rest of it. But it's just really bad planning, isn't it? And obviously we've got that extra domestic cup that not everybody else has, which means that we had that extra fixture last week. And yeah, it just baffles me. Everybody else seems to want to do everything within their power to make their sides as competitive as possible in Europe, because they understand that it impacts on the coefficient ranking and all the rest of it. Yet we in England are determined to overwork people and squeeze as much out of them as we possibly can. I've also, since we last spoke, watched the Leicester game back again. And I've come to the conclusion that if we played that game 100 times, we win it 99 times. I'm actually surprised that our XG on the day was only 4. Leicester created 0 chances outside of the 2 goals that they scored. And were they even real chances? I guess the second one was a good bit of play. The first one was a set piece that we ought to have dealt with much better. But I guess my takeaway is there's nothing that we really need to read into with regards to our defence. It hasn't just gone off a cliff in terms of our standards. Like, we're still solid. We still defend really, really well. I think what that does is just kind of re-emphasize the ruthless nature of this league. But that's enough looking back. Let's look ahead to tomorrow night's game. Mikel Arteta's former club are in town. And of course, he has been speaking to the press. Before we get into that, though, I do want to say a few hellos, because there's plenty of you in the live chat with me today. Matt, we've got MGZ who says, TikTok, were you referring to me being late? I was as close to on time as I've probably been in the best part of a year today, so I'm not having that. We got Brian joining us from California. We got BX Gunner. James says, hope you messaged Scott about his dusty club. My colleague at 90 Min, Scott, was away today. He wasn't on the show. He is actually on holiday. It's a holiday that he's booked for months, so he isn't shirking it because of course Manchester United had a real stinker. What else have we got? We got Crypto FPL, we got Patrick, we got Money Ain't, and we've got Russ in the chat, as well as many more of you. Remember, guys, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel and all the rest of it. Let's begin, I would say, by diving into Mikel Arteta's press conference today. I kind of want to touch on some of the key points. I think some of the key points are obviously around the fitness update that he was asked for right at the start of the press conference. And Mikel Arteta's reply was, no big news. But there is kind of some big news, right? Because yesterday we were all rocked by this rumour that was going around that Riccardo Calafiori had picked up a knee injury while celebrating what turned out to be the winning goal last weekend. And there was a part of me that thought, are you bloody serious? Like, how's your luck? Like, the guy turns to celebrate from the videos that I saw and does his knee in. And then he obviously left the stadium wearing some kind of protective sleeve thing over his knee, and there was an attempt there to try and mitigate any potential problem that might have been developing in the aftermath of that sudden movement, if you want to call it that. And so there was a big scare around that. And although Mikel Arteta said no big news, I think it kind of is big news that Riccardo Calafiori trained, that Takahiro Tomiyasu was in training, that Mikel Merino was in training, and not just in training, but caught in a photograph making a slide tackle. You might think, why the hell is that important? Well, when you think about the fact that we knew that he was back in training, but that they were managing and being really, really careful around the amount of contact he has because the bone is still healing, the fact that he's thrown himself into slide tackles means even if he's not medically got the green light to be doing everything and anything, he clearly feels he can, which I guess you can look at as a good sign. And one of the things I kind of wanted to start off on today's pod, where we kind of go into the subject in a little bit more detail, is Riccardo Calafiori, because I think he's so important to this Arsenal team right now, more than people realise, in my view. Now, you might be thinking, well, everybody can see that he's a really, really good player, and everybody can see, that he's full of flair and he's full of swagger. And I think I put a post out at the weekend where I said I didn't think that it was possible to have that much flair, swagger, style, but also be a monster in the challenge and an absolute beast, really, when going into those physical duels. And I guess the reason I think he's super important is because right now we're having to cope with a really key component. We're having to cope without Martin Odegaard. And over the last few weeks, we have had to find different ways of playing because we rely so heavily on Martin Odegaard normally. We funnel so much through him normally. And therefore, our game plan and our style and the patterns of play that normally come naturally to us become less effective. And therefore, we have to find alternatives, right? And one of the ways that Mikel Arteta has been able to do that is by changing the shape in the midfield. I think that's partly down to Martin Odegaard's absence, but it's partly down to the fact that maybe he doesn't trust Thomas Partey to manage big spaces alone anymore. And he feels that he needs that extra bit of protection. When he's played Jorginho, we can all agree that that's been the right way to go as well. Adding that second midfielder in, slightly tweaking Declan Rice's role when he's available. Obviously, he wasn't available at Spurs, and so we had to go even deeper with the kind of double pivot that day to accommodate the fact that it was made up of Jorginho and Partey. So our midfield dynamic has changed a little bit. But what's also changed is the way we use our fullbacks. Now, it's no coincidence to me, and I know that I touched on this on the post-Leicester pod, but it's no coincidence to me that since Riccardo Calafiori's come into the team, Gabriel Martinelli's playing a lot better. And you might be thinking, well, why? They've only played together twice. They've only started together twice, right? So it isn't this like long-standing relationship that's had loads of time to breathe and develop into something really cohesive and really connected. That isn't what's happened here. What's happened is that we've got a fullback who does similar things to what Alexander Zinchenko was doing in an attacking sense, but also has the capacity to get back and defend in a way that Alexander Zinchenko just could never. And that's where Calafiori has brought the best out of Martinelli for me. He's happy to carry the ball inside. And I touched on it again in the last pod. I don't want to go over it in too much depth again. I realize I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here. But we talked about that Zinchenko interview that he gave to Rio Ferdinand last season, where he said, me going infield causes chaos because either the wide player comes in and follows me because he's worried about an overload in the midfield, which means if I then open up my body and send it out to Martinelli, he's got a 1v1 with the fullback, and I'd back him, he said, 9 times out of 10 to beat the fullback. Or if he doesn't follow me and he stays with Martinelli, I've created an overload in midfield and we can go through that way. So how do you deal with that as a defensive side? How do you deal with Arsenal doing that? Well, the truth is you have to choose one way or the other, and Arsenal have got enough ability within their ranks and there's enough intelligence within the team now to figure out what the opposition is going to do and to take the alternative route. So that's why Zinchenko was really, really important. But the drawbacks of playing Zinchenko were always and have always been that defensively he leaves us vulnerable. Well, Calafiori doesn't do that, but he also gives you all the plus points going forward. And now that we're without Martin Odegaard and we're having to find a different way to break teams down, the use of our fullbacks is really, really important. Calafiori coming in field and Jurrien Timber making those overlapping runs that he did really, really well at the weekend against Leicester City. I think Calafiori's positivity, willingness to go forward is a massive help. And if he's out against PSG, which I hope he isn't, by the way, if he's out and you put Jakub Kiwior in there, you're not going to get that, which takes away from our attacking play that is already lacking because Martin Odegaard is absent. So Calafiori's importance right now, especially with Martin Odegaard out, I think is huge. And we really, really need to have him fit and available. Ben White is out too, which means that you can't switch Timber from right to left. And I would argue that Timber is less comfortable when he's on the left and he's being asked to invert than he is on the right when he's going on the outside. So I don't really want to take too much away from his game as well. But with no Zinchenko available, Tomiyasu has similar limitations to Kiwior, in my opinion, when it comes to attacking play. It's really, really important that Calafiori plays because he brings the best out of some of the players around him. I think that's absolutely key. And that's why I wanted to highlight his importance here. Don't forget, guys, there's loads of you in the chat. Why aren't you hitting that like button? What are you doing? Let me know your thoughts on the subjects that we're discussing. Riccardo Calafiori's importance. Colin says, Cala was in training this afternoon. He was, but we don't know whether he's ready to start the game. We don't know if Mikel Arteta will look at the thing that happened against Leicester as a bit of a scare and say, you know what, we don't need to take the risk a few days after. Give him a few more days to recover and we can bring him back in when we play Southampton at the weekend. We just don't know, right? But the fact that he was in training is obviously a good sign. Merino and Tomiyasu being back is massive because it adds depth to the squad and we feel like we've been lacking that quite a bit recently because of the injury problems that we've had and with the big sort of uptake in terms of the number of games that we've got. We're now having less recovery time, less days in between. And when you're having to play the same players over and over again and you're asking them to be super intense and super aggressive, it can be a problem. Haylor says in the chat, how good are PSG at the moment? You're going to find out because in the second part of tonight's show, you are going to hear from Quentin Gesp, who is a French football expert, writer over at 90 Min France. He's the main man there. He's worked for various other outlets as well. He's going to be at the game covering it as well. In fact, right now, having just exchanged a text message with him, he is at Luis Enrique's press conference. So he's right across all things Paris Saint-Germain, and he's going to give us the download on them in the second part of the show. But before we move in to that part of the show, we've still got some Dermot Gallagher ranting to come as well, which I'm really, really looking forward to. I just wanted to remind you guys that this podcast is brought to you by NordVPN, the best VPN service out there. It's a service that I myself have plenty of experience using, and you can sign up now via the link below. Visit nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC for a mega discount and 4 months for free at the end of your plan. With NordVPN, not only do I have extra protection when surfing the web, downloading and streaming, but I also have the ability to change my virtual location with the click of a button, and that means I can access content that's geo-blocked, use streaming services that are not available in the UK, and when I'm traveling, I'm able to log into my Sky Go, TNT Sports, and BBC iPlayer, meaning I don't miss a beat. Sign up now via nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC and take advantage of this amazing offer. Plus, with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, it's totally risk-free. You will not regret it. nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC is where you need to head. As I say, the link is below in the description. You can also check us out on Patreon. Of course, the link to that is in the description below as well. And tomorrow we'll be dropping a Declan Rice special because I've got some thoughts on Declan Rice and the position that he's currently playing in. And I'm not sure if I like it. And that's what I'm going to talk about or have spoken about, but I'm going to release it tomorrow on the In Focus podcast over on our Patreon. So sign up to our Patreon page. The link is in the description below, and I thank you all so much for your support. Remember, leave a like on this video and all the rest of it. Okay, let's have a listen then to what French football expert Quentin Gesp, I've said that better that time, Quentin, I think that's the right way. Let's have a listen to what he had to say on PSG, their chances, where they're at this season, Luis Enrique, and more. Apparently, there's no sound on that. I don't know why. Hold on a second. That shouldn't be the case. Oh, sorry, guys. Sorry. 1 second. Let me fix that. I've got no idea why that's happened. I thought it was all set up and ready to go. Hold on a second. If you give me a second, so just bear with me, I will fix it. 1 minute. 1 minute. I know what to do. And you will be able to hear this, don't worry. But just give me a second to fix it. Paris Saint-Germain, Arsenal's opponents in the UEFA Champions League. Okay, guys, this should work now. Let me know in the chat. I'll monitor it from my phone and check it out. But this should work. Apologies for that. So sorry. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by French football expert, 90-minute journalist Quentin Gesp, who is going to give us some insight into Paris Saint-Germain, Arsenal's opponents in the UEFA Champions League, of course, this Tuesday night. Quentin, let's talk about where PSG are at right now generally. For a long time, looking from the outside in, there's been this obsession within PSG to go on and win the UEFA Champions League. But am I right in saying that people have maybe calmed down in terms of those expectations? It's not thought, is it, in France that PSG are a side now that can win that competition as it was maybe 2-3 seasons ago?
No, you're absolutely right. Even at the club, the people at the very top are not obsessed with winning the Champions League. They understood that it was not a process that you go, you put money in, you bring players in, and you win it instantly. It's a long-term process, and they switched a bit their mentality in that sense as well. They gave up on bringing big names to bring players that would suit a collective that is able to win big things. So at the moment, no one is really speaking about winning the Champions League. No one is really expecting them to be at the same level as Real Madrid, Man City, Arsenal. Maybe Arsenal is a bit more controversial on that. But basically, they are allowing the club and the manager a bit more time to win big in the upcoming years.
What's the opinion on kind of Luis Enrique? Obviously, he's a coach that has a very, very clear playing style from his Barcelona days. He's gone to PSG, and you mentioned that they've kind of changed their approach a little bit. They are looking at a more sustainable, longer-term approach. Is there confidence, at least in France, that Luis Enrique is the man to deliver that?
I'm not entirely sure about the whole France, but I would say at PSG, they are expecting him to be that manager that will help them to achieve great things in the future. They understood as well that you can't build a process and change managers every 1 year, 2 years. They are allowing him more time to try and achieve that. They saw in him the right person to build something for the upcoming years. They saw as well a manager with that kind of character that will place the club first instead of individualities or like big names. And yeah, he has a clear attacking style, and he wants to develop something on the long run. I think you're absolutely right. PSG at least think that they have a manager in their hands that will help them to get that.
One of the reasons I think this is going to be a fascinating game is because both managers love control. Mm-hmm. Both managers want their sides to go out and dominate, dictate the tempo of the game. Luis Enrique's PSG are not going to turn up at Emirates Stadium on Tuesday night and park the bus, I wouldn't think. That might leave spaces for Arsenal to expose, but equally it feels like it's going to be a bit of a sort of back and forth. It could turn into a bit of a basketball game, really, which I think is it makes for really interesting viewing. Talk to me about some of the players that maybe Arsenal should be looking out for, because obviously Kylian Mbappe is no longer at the football club, and looking from the outside in, from an English football perspective, that would have been the name that I think people would always gravitate towards. He's not there now. Who else should Arsenal be looking out for? Who is a cause for concern? Who does Mikel Arteta have to figure out a way of stopping?
There's one obvious name that instantly comes to my mind, is Bradley Barcola. At the moment, he's the best PSG player at the moment. He is fascinating in the way he approaches games. He doesn't overthink anything. He's just playing his style, trying to break lines, adding a bit of freshness to this PSG side, because just like in the early days of Kylian Mbappe, he's very straight, very direct, and he goes for the duos. He doesn't think that he's inferior to any defenders, so he'll constantly chase them with the ball or without, with his moves. So he's probably the most exciting talent to watch if you're on a outside perspective, I would say. If you're Arsenal, you must think that this is the guy that will create danger, create chaos into that defense. At the same time, I think that Arsenal has the players to try and control him as much as we can. The other one I would mention is probably Kang In Lee, because we are touching on that, I think, a bit later. But with the absence of Ousmane Dembélé, he could be that man that can be brought into that starting 11. Luis Enrique has been full of praise after the Rennes game over the weekend. He has been brilliant in a very different position than the one I'm thinking he could be playing at the Emirates. He was playing as a false 9 against Rennes. I think he might be playing on the right to sub Ousmane Dembélé. He's been brilliant on the ball, extremely innovative in the way he runs, and he thinks the game very quickly, which is perfect for Luis Enrique's mindset. And the other one to look at for is João Neves. He's been linked with all the major clubs. Exactly, and he's extremely talented. You can see that he's perfectly fit for this style, and he's already on 5 assists, I think, this season with PSG in the league. He's playing a bit deeper than what you could have expected, but at the same time, I think he's a really creative player that can bring a lot of energy to that PSG side. One thing to be seen, that remains to be seen, is if he will stay with a midfield three made of Warren Zaïre-Emery, Vitinha, and João Neves, because that's most of the games PSG played with, is with this midfield. In today's L'Équipe article, they were thinking that maybe he would bring in more higher players, taller players, because they will Arsenal are a threat on set pieces mainly, and they think that maybe the lack of tall players might cost PSG. So that's one thing to be seen.
That's really interesting, because Arsenal's physical presence has become a real weapon for them in the Premier League. You mentioned set pieces. They seem to be able to, when the football's not quite going the way they want to, they seem to be able to use I don't want to use the term bullying, but they seem to be able to bully their way through football matches as well. And we've seen that, really work for them in recent times, especially. You mentioned there Ousmane Dembélé. Now, he's a player that would have been one of the ones in my mind going into this game. But at the time of recording, we woke up to some news today that he will not be involved in this game. What's your understanding of the events that have led to this? Because we're hearing it's a tactical decision, but we're also hearing something very, very different as well. So what's your understanding of Ousmane Dembélé's situation and why he's not going to be involved at Emirates as we understand it?
That's a disciplinary decision that was made by Luis Enrique. It's been confirmed by L'Équipe and RMC, which are the biggest media outlets out there in France. There has been a heated conversation with Luis Enrique after the Rennes game on Friday night. I don't have any information on that, and I don't want to be
just speculate.
Yeah, speculative. But it's basically some things that were said in the conversation that Luis Enrique didn't appreciate. There's probably his involvement, some of the moves that he made that were not exactly what Luis Enrique was expecting. And yeah, Luis Enrique has an ego, and he has made this decision, which can be costing PSG, because in this new format you can't afford to leave your best players out. You can argue that he's probably the top two best players of this PSG side so far this season, just after Barcola. So it's a major decision that was made by Luis Enrique. Yeah, it's very unpredicted. You couldn't have predicted that. We'll see if that's the right choice. At the same time, I've seen some PSG fans be very happy about it, because it shows that that's the club first, and then after you leave your ego to the locker room. At the same time, I'm not sure if it's exactly for the benefit of the club, or if it's not because Luis Enrique also has an ego. We'll see. Yeah, exactly. We'll see in the upcoming days.
PSG obviously won their Ligue 1 game this weekend. They were allowed to play on Friday night, which I think is massive, and it's something that I'm always very critical of the kind of English football powers for, because they don't accommodate things like that. We see it not just in Ligue 1, but we see it in the Serie A quite a bit. We see it in the Eredivisie, where teams are allowed, and maybe it's partly for television reasons as well, but they kind of think about what their team have coming up in Europe. And so PSG have that extra day's rest. Obviously, Arsenal played on Saturday, and they had to go right down to the wire to make sure that they got all 3 points. As I look at the Ligue 1 table now, they are top of the pile. They've got 16 points on the board from 6 games, 5 wins, 1 draw. It's an identical record to Monaco, who are second right now. PSG's goal difference is significantly better, which is why they're top of the pile. What's the general feeling around PSG right now? Because from us looking in, it's Paris Saint-Germain. They've got incredible wealth, incredible players. They should be walking Ligue 1 every single season. Is there a feeling that that's going to be the case this time around? Is there a feeling that anybody else can put up a fight, can put up a challenge? We know Monaco are there now, but can they sustain that? So what's the general consensus around Luis Enrique's side?
They are expecting to be winning the league because that's PSG, because that's what they are used to do. At the same time, I think this season there's more competition for this PSG side, because we've seen Monaco being very competitive, playing an extremely exciting football as well. They are attacking. They are really interesting to watch. There's also Marseille, who's been putting a lot of money on the table to be more competitive, to be closer to this PSG side, and that's what is working for the league, is that we have finally a bit of competition for this PSG, and we are bringing excitement back to that title race, because like in the last few years, even if that's not completely true, because we have seen clubs like Lille, clubs like Monaco, clubs like Montpellier back in the days being able to fight for the title and win it. But we might have like finally sustainable competition for this PSG side, thanks to that owners putting a bit more money on the table to have like competitive squads to fight for the title as well. But PSG are still expecting to be that winning side, but we might see some surprise.
I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you for a prediction for the match because it's really, really difficult to do. There's so many things to factor in. Where do you think the game will be won and lost, though? What areas of this game are you really interested in seeing? Because you mentioned PSG's midfield, whether they'll change that or not. PSG clearly have the weaponry in attack to hurt Arsenal. Are they good enough defensively? Where do you think this game will be decided in terms of areas on the pitch?
I would still say the midfield, because I'm interested to see what will be the choices for Luis Enrique in midfield. If he will go for like taller players or like keep that very technical midfield. I'm also eager to see if Arsenal will actually drop back Kai Havertz to that midfield, like we've seen a couple of times. That will bring like technical skills to that midfield, which is extremely competitive. When
there's
you
a
look
good
at
chance
it.
that happens because there's still no Martin Odegaard. Obviously, Fabio Vieira's out on loan, picked up an injury, but he's out on loan. Emile Smith-Rowe's gone. And so that has been a bit of a problem position for Arsenal. They've used Havertz there. Sometimes they've used Trossard there and pushed Havertz on that little bit further. But he does have the option of bringing Jesus in up front, for example, and using Havertz as a proper midfielder. So that's really, really interesting. But you think the midfield is the key?
Yeah, I think that's the key part, because Arsenal are extremely talented players up front, with Martinelli, with Saka, with Gabriel Jesus, with potentially Havertz if he's not playing in midfield. And they are extremely talented. They are able to score at any point. But if you don't win that midfield battle, you might have a bit more troubles.
And if you don't win that midfield battle, how can you possibly exert the control that Luis Enrique's sides like to play with? How can you play the Luis Enrique way if you can't get the ball in the first place, or it's very easy for the opposition to dispossess you? So I think his style is reliant on them being able to take some kind of control in that area. And the question is, can they do it?
I think so. Yeah, I think they are able to do it. At the same time, I don't think PSG will be good enough and they are settled enough to win this kind of games, because, as you mentioned, Kylian Mbappe is not there anymore. So you don't have like this player able to score at any point.
At any time.
Maybe Barcola is that player, but that remains to be seen on the long run, in the big games as well. So I'm excited for that game, for that fixture. I think Arsenal has more quality in that side, and more stability as well, to be that team that will make the most out of it, basically. At the back, PSG has weaknesses. We didn't mention them, but we are not sure that PSG is good enough at the back. Nuno Mendes, who's probably going to start at left back, has weaknesses in his game, maybe at the back.
More than up against Bukayo Saka.
Exactly. And that's a very tough challenge for him, because attacking on the attacking front, he's really good. Defensively, I don't think he's as talented as someone like Ben White can be. And same at the right, because Achraf Hakimi is extremely talented up front, but he leaves some space in his back, and that partnership in as centre back is not as good as Gabriel and Saliba, I think. So might be a bit challenging for that PSG defense, and also like home advantage and these kind of things. That's going to be interesting. Very tough fixture for this PSG side, I would say.
Fingers crossed that's the case. Quentin, thank you for joining me, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, mate.
That was Quentin Gesp, my good friend and colleague, French football journalist and expert on the subject of Paris Saint-Germain, offering some excellent insight there into the Ligue 1 leaders. Make sure you leave a like on the video. If not for me, then for Mr. Quentin, who, of course, I'm really thankful to, because he gave up some time earlier today. And I know that Mondays, when you're a football writer and journalist, are a very, 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 very busy day. So for him to give up that time and meet me to record that, what an absolute legend. So thank you to him. Okay, one more subject to talk about on today's pod. We are going to do who should start versus PSG tomorrow. So that will be an episode that comes to you guys tomorrow, probably about 10, 11 a.m., something like that. I'm going to have a think about my team. I'm going to continue some of my prep for the game because, of course, I'm commentating on the game tomorrow night, which I'm really, really looking forward to. And so I've gone a little bit deeper into all the preparations. And once I complete that, I'll be in a much better position to tell you who I think should play and why. But I did want to touch on one more subject, as I say, before we go this evening, and that is on a man by the name of Dermot Gallagher. What a hypocrite. Like, what a hypocrite Dermot Gallagher is. Like, does he stand in front of a camera and do this for effect? Like, it's genuinely the only thing I can think of right now. Now, for those of you that are wondering what on earth I'm talking about, Dermot Gallagher, former Premier League referee, does a weekly segment on Sky Sports News where he discusses the big refereeing calls of the week, and he gives his opinion on whether or not the officials got it wrong or right. Now, this is the guy that said that Declan Rice was correctly sent off. This is the guy that also said that Leandro Trossard was correctly sent off. Have a listen. I'm going to read it to you because I can't play it, but have a listen to what he had to say with regards to the incident involving Wilfred Ndidi at the weekend at Emirates Stadium. Now, Wilfred Ndidi was already on a yellow card. I'm sure you've seen the clips going around of him kicking the ball away before a free kick was taken. But what I want to say on this is, first and foremost, before I get into it, I do not want to see Wilfred Ndidi sent off for that. If I did, I'd be a hypocrite, okay? I just think that this whole thing has gotten out of hand and it's getting really, really silly now. And referees have to apply some common sense. But the reason I'm so triggered by what Dermot Gallagher has had to say, which is that the referee on the day was wrong. Was correct not to book Wilfred Ndidi, is because he says that he wasn't actually delaying a restart. And the reason that he says he wasn't actually delaying a restart is because there's a player on the floor when he kicks the ball out of play. Now, Declan Rice, you could argue, if you really wanted to, and I completely disagree with this, but if you wanted to make the case that Declan Rice was delaying a restart because Brighton tried to take the free kick quickly, even though Veltman was aiming it at no one and was clearly just trying to get Declan Rice in trouble. But if you wanted to make that case, I don't agree with it, but I can kind of deal with it. But on the Trossard example, where Trossard is booked for a second time, having kicked the ball away 0.84 of a second after the referee's whistle's blown, Bernardo Silva was on the floor. So why was that decision correct? Why was it right to send Leandro Trossard off? And why is that different with Wilfred Ndidi? Somebody please explain it to me. Somebody please explain it to me. He said, if you want players, this is Dermot Gallagher, yellow carded for that, we're going to have a lot of players sat in the stands this season. Didn't they think of that before they introduced this stupid directive? Didn't they think about that before they became super pedantic and super nitpicky about what gets penalised and what doesn't? So Dermot Gallagher says that Ndidi should never have got a second yellow card. He didn't get one, obviously, but he defended the referee's decision not to award him one, even though he kicked it way further than Declan Rice did, etc., because Bukayo Saka was still on the floor, therefore he wasn't actually delaying a restart. Well, when Leandro Trossard kicked the ball away at Manchester City, Bernardo Silva was on the floor. Therefore, technically, by that standard, he wasn't delaying a restart either, because the restart couldn't happen. Bernardo Silva was on the floor. So what I find really annoying and really, really frustrating about all of this is that the same guy can look at very similar situations from one week to the next, and then he can come up with completely different interpretations of them when he wants to back his mate. when he wants to back someone in the PGMOL, he can come up with something completely different. He said, if you want players yellow carded for that, we're going to have a lot of players sat in the stands this season. Where was that logic and thinking over the past few weeks? Why is it only something that he's thought about now? To me, it's just mad. It's honestly, it's so frustrating. And every time you think that you get over something like that, like it frustrates you, you get wound up by it, you think you're over it, you think you've moved on, then a referee comes out, a former referee in this case, but someone who's clearly on the PGMOL's payroll, clearly being put in these positions to go out and discuss what he's discussing. When he comes out and says something completely contradictory to what he said over the last few weeks, how are you supposed to take these people seriously? And genuinely, when I saw this morning, I was sitting there laughing, and a colleague of mine said to me, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Genuinely, mate, they must be doing this for effect. Like, they must be doing it to create drama. Like, they must be doing it to create a talking point, because the way that the interpretation of very similar situations differs from week to week to week is incredibly frustrating. It shows that we can't uphold any standard of officiating in this league. Even when it's bad, it's not consistently bad, and when it's good, it's not consistently bad again. It's a complete and utter mess, basically, is what I'm saying there. And yeah, really, really wound me up listening to that earlier on today, and I just wanted to vent that at the end of today's show. A big thank you, guys, for joining me. Really, really appreciate it. Big thank you to Quentin once again for joining me on the pod earlier today to discuss all things Paris Saint-Germain. Sorry again for the technical issues a little bit earlier on in the show. For those of you listening on audio, you won't have a clue what I'm talking about because I'd have edited it out. But those of you on YouTube, unfortunately, are stuck with it. Thank you so much. And I will see you all on the Matchday Reaction Pod tomorrow night from Emirates Stadium after Arsenal hopefully beat Paris Saint-Germain. All the rest of you, I will see you on Wednesday morning when we react to the PSG game in full. Remember, if you want to sign up on Patreon so that you can access the Matchday Reaction Pod, the link is in the description below. So click on that. Sign up, see if you like it. I'm sure you will. And yeah, we'll be back very, very soon with more. Until the next one, take care of yourselves. Have a great evening. Goodbye.